All right. Well, hey everyone. Welcome in. I don't know if you call this an addition or what, but I'm just happy to be here with Dr. Rick Brandenburg from North Carolina State University this morning to talk to you all about insects, I believe.
Hopefully, yes.
Yep. I think he's relying on me to stay on topic, folks. So, but no, before we get going, I just want to say thank you. To you specifically, as well as NC State. The partnership we've got between the Carolinas and the university is just phenomenal. It's obviously a lot longer than I've been around. So maybe if you want to share a little tidbit of the history and how long you've been at NC State for those folks who might not know.
Okay. Well, I actually got my PhD at NC State a long time ago when there were only like 40 students there or something. It was a long, long time ago. And then got my first faculty position at the University of Missouri. And the biggest value in going to Missouri for 4 years, that's where I met my wife. And then back in 1985, had an opportunity to come back to NC State and bring my wife along, and have been at NC State now for 35 years. Yes, I started when I was 12, so that's the only way I'm still able to go. But I've been a long time, and yes, the relationship that NC State has had, obviously, with Clemson University, but equally important with Carolinas, has been a long-standing tradition. We obviously are major participants in the conference and show every year in November, and lots of colleagues and friendships have been developed over those years. And one of these days, when I finally decide to retire, I think that's going to be one of the biggest holes that's left in my life, is just simply all the colleagues and friendships and everything that have been established over many, many decades, and the relationships that have been built, because it truly, I won't say it's unique, the relationship Clemson and NC State have with the Golf Course Association in this area, but it truly is special. It really is. We've just known a lot of people for a lot of years, and it's worked out well for everyone.
Well, you do know that when you retire in 15 or 20 years, that you'll always be an invited guest. You always get to come down. We some of us, like myself, refer to it as the Borman clause, right? So
Okay.
you get to come back every year. Now you don't have to volunteer, but you're always
But
welcome.
do I have to work?
No.
Okay, that was the most important part. But
No,
I'll probably still be willing to do some of that as well.
He's a paid volunteer. Don't let him fool you. He doesn't come down there just for the
Okay.
Ruth's Chris dinner he takes himself out to.
That's not the story he tells. But anyway, I'll go with your version, Tim.
That's great. That's great. All right. Well, hey, let's talk some bugs here, specific to the Carolinas, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So I know when you and I talked the other day, it's not just today in the recent couple crazy weeks of rain and weather that we've had that's led to some changes, if you will. I mean, I think we've had 16 inches of rain right here at the house in the last 14 days, which obviously has had a major impact on fungus and things of that nature. So where are we at? How long has the bug challenge been going for us, if you will, going into last fall, right?
Yeah, obviously all of you know that throughout all of the Carolinas, this past winter was almost non-existent. In looking back, it seemed like it was warmer in February and March than it was in April and May. But we had really almost a non-existent winter compared to normal. It was very, very mild. And that didn't really affect many of the insects a whole lot, other than fire ants. And you got a couple of warm days in the middle of winter, and the fire ants were ready to roll, and the mounds would get active again. For the rest of the insects, it really didn't have that much of an impact, even though, because I'm a bug scientist, I like to keep track of these things. And as we looked, when we got to the 31st of March in Raleigh, North Carolina, we were 26 days ahead of schedule if you based it on degree day accumulations. So in 3 months, from January 1 to the end of March, we were a month ahead of schedule, which is just remarkable. And for much of the Carolinas, it was the earliest spring on record. And then April hit. And so now here we are when we're recording this at the end of May. In those 2 months since March 31st, we're back to normal. So that month that we gained ahead, we lost in April and May. And as we look at the timing of things, such as mole cricket flights and egg hatch and all that, and white grubs and things, we're going to be really back to normal from a heat accumulation, as we like to refer to it, because insects are cold-blooded and their development is very dependent upon temperatures. And it's different a little bit for weeds, where you've got thresholds for germination and photoperiod, and for diseases you've got moisture and all these other things that enter into it. With insects, it is driven, I won't say 90%, but most of the development is driven solely by temperature. But the other side of it is that it really, for things like soil insects, such as even fire ants, but particularly mole crickets and white grubs, it's really also modified by rainfall patterns. And obviously we're getting the rain now. And what that means is we're late enough and it's been just warm enough that with all this rain, the mole crickets are just laying eggs like crazy. If we had not gotten this rain, and for many areas early May was dry, the mole crickets, no matter how warm it was, would be holding their eggs and not laying them, because if they lay them in dry soil, the eggs dry out and they don't hatch. And they're smart enough to understand that. So when rainfall events happen, they lay their eggs. So given the fact that we're kind of on normal for temperature, now as we get to the end of May and we're all of a sudden getting all this rainfall, mole crickets are going to be about on their normal timing. And the fact that we have all this soil moisture means we're probably going to have some pretty healthy populations of them, because all the eggs that are laid, unless they drowned, are probably going to hatch, and the little ones will be really happy. So, weather drives insect populations. It really does. When we have warm temperatures and good soil moisture, we're going to have a lot of insects like fire ants, mole crickets, and white grubs.
All right. So a couple questions on that. The mole crickets. So is that the one where we can go get the Dawn and flush them up with the washing solution there?
Yes, that is the one, and that's the thing. We talk about, because we've gotten much better at controlling mole crickets after 30 years of experience with them, and we know that we've got some really good products. What we can't afford to do is get sloppy with the application timing, just because the products are really good. And so the Dawn dishwashing detergent, or Lemon Joy, whatever you decide to use, it's still really important that over the next few weeks, depending on where you are in the Carolinas, you go out, you dump a little bit of soapy water, and you look for the little tiny crickets that come out of the ground. I don't care what approach you use, whether it's with the Cadillac treatments or with some of the shorter term ones that are a little more, inexpensive. You still, if you time it when the little ones are hatching out, you're going to get the best possible results from that treatment, whether it costs $15 an acre or $200 an acre. That's still the best way to do it, using the soapy dishwater. Yep.
Okay. So in these challenging times, do we need to expect a run on dishwashing solution like we saw in toilet paper?
Probably so. I've been to a lot of maintenance facilities, and you go in their pesticide storage, it's just loaded with dishwashing detergent. So but it's hidden behind the toilet paper. So, but I mean, we've talked about in the past, when this pandemic first hit, and it created some issues. Some places were shut down for a little bit of time. Some people, because of budgets, maybe had to let somebody go. Maybe you had to make some cuts in your management plan, and we've talked about, well, what things can you afford to put off or delay? And in the case of mole crickets, that's really one that you don't want to get behind on that. You don't want to be fighting an untreated mole cricket population in August and September, because you're going to end up spending a lot more money, and the level of control is going to be, poor at best, fair at best, I guess. But that's not money that I would try to save. If you have a history of mole crickets on your golf course, you need to be getting out there and treating either last week or this week or next week or whatever, because you're going to spend so much money later in the summer trying to correct the fact that you were able to save a few dollars early on. And the end result, your fairways and tees and greens just are not going to look good. So that's not a cut that I would ever make, is mole cricket management. Fall armyworms, fire ants, those are things you can catch up on, but not mole crickets.
So if, from a solution standpoint, if there's somebody listening out there in our area, if you will, and they have questions about timing, et cetera, what do you recommend for them to do right now? Where should they go? Call you?
They can call. Well, the first thing I recommend, if you're in Myrtle Beach South, they could certainly be hatching out now. Go out with your soapy water and look for them. If you're from Myrtle Beach North, it's going to be happening very soon. I would do the same thing. Again, I think our timing from a temperature perspective now has been brought back into normal, so it's not like they hatched a month ago. But with typically with all when we get rainy periods of time, they lay a lot of eggs, and within a week after this rainy period, we're going to start seeing little ones hatch out, and that's going to be then from Myrtle Beach North. It's going to be a good time in early June to get those treatments out.
So is there not a company that people can hire to go and harvest these things and sell as fishing bait?
No, it's unfortunate that that market hasn't been. We could probably find uses for them if we had a way to harvest them. In some parts of the world, they actually eat them. I'm
I've
not
seen that.
aware in any part of the world where they use them as toilet paper, but hey, I've not been everywhere. So, but they're an incredibly problematic insect, and they have a lot of things going for them, and they've been one of our biggest challenges as far as cost effectiveness, finding ways that uh, we can manage them with a reasonable cost. But no, I wish we could. They apparently, some people have told me, do make a good fish bait though.
So, but they can impact any area of your golf course, correct? I mean, this isn't selective, right?
No, what we typically find, however, is that once they found the parts of your golf course that they really like, they have a tendency to be creatures of habit and come back to those same areas over and over again. So it's not like if you've had areas damaged the last 3 years that this year or next year they're going to find a new location. There's just something about it. And we've done some studies in the past on soil qualities and characteristics. And when they seem to find areas that they prefer, whatever those characteristics are, silt, clay content, all those sorts of things, they really stay in those areas. So if you map those areas, you can really get cost effective because I don't know that there's ever been a course I've been to that 100% of the course has been susceptible to mole crickets. And if you map those and keep track of that, you can find there are certain areas you probably do not need to treat every year.
So are they would like what again, I tried to warn you about my dumb questions here, but
Okay,
so
I'll
like
give you
for
dumb
fire,
answers, so we're good.
so for fire ants, right? You treat them, they seem to move, etc. If you were to map an area and you were to cover it from year to year, are you trying to eliminate the population within that entire area, or are they going to typically find a way to move to another area?
We've not seen a lot of relocation. What happens is in the Carolinas, because we get so much rainfall, we have so much vegetation, and mole crickets can feed on a variety of things that you've got them coming out of the natural areas, you've got them coming out of the rough, you've got them coming out of home lawns, you've got them coming out of pastures. So they're very, I guess you could use the word ubiquitous, which I don't know what it means, but it sounds like a good word to use right now. They're everywhere. And so even if you do a really, really good job of controlling them on, say, your fairways and your tees and greens, there's still going to be residual ones in surrounding fringe areas and neighborhoods, everything else. And then when they get up and fly, they can relocate. And obviously a golf course, because of the quality of the turf and the irrigation, is an attractive site. But also, even when you use the best materials, you time them properly, and you get really, really good control, you're typically with mole crickets looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 92 to 94% control. So you're not getting all of them. And with some of these populations, we see 20 or 30 when they first hatch out per square yard. So if you think, well, I'm getting 90 some percent control, it still leaves a few. And
Wow.
so you're never going to, and I've looked at this all over basically the world had an opportunity like this. You never eliminate them. You could say, well, I'm going to be real aggressive for 2 years and spend a lot of money, and then I'm not going to have to worry about treating them for 2 or 3 years. That's not going to happen. They're a tough insect. So just come up with a cost-effective approach, map the areas that need it, don't treat the areas that don't. It is very rare that they move into those areas on an established golf course where you've not seen them for several years, just simply because there's something about the soil characteristics or whatever that they just prefer not to be in that area. So the idea of relocating them from one fairway to another just really doesn't happen very often.
Gotcha. All right. So you mentioned something about last fall in the winter time and the didn't necessarily have a big impact. So my personal question is, why did I spend Christmas with stink bugs? Seemed like there was a second or third hatching of those last fall.
Yeah, but some of these insects, we had an additional generation. because typically we'd had by a certain day in the fall, we'd have had a killing frost that would have taken these insects out. It was very warm. And for most insects, the threshold temperature is 50 degrees. When it's cooler than 50 degrees, they don't eat, they don't move around much. When it's warmer than 50 degrees, well, that's kind of a critical temperature in the Carolinas, because a lot of our winter is just above that 50-degree threshold. So if we had in a normal winter, we have days where we have activity and we have days where insects are active. When we have an unusually warm winter, and I don't remember in November and December and even January, February, how many days we had that were 70 degrees or warmer, but we had a lot of them.
Sure.
So the insects, because it was 10, 15, 20 degrees above their threshold for activity, they were very, very active. And I think that's one of the reasons why, even back in February, when we get a good rain, the fire ants would just be so active because the soil temperature was still very warm, and they just took advantage of it.
So how many of those 50-degree days do you have to have? You can't just have one and it's a magic, they're done for the season, right? I assume, because like you said, we got back up into the 70s for however many days during the winter. I mean, it was crazy enough to give your warm season grass a zap, and to leave your tiger stripes, but not enough to set back the insects.
No, that's exactly right. And insects do have a bit of a kind of a check and balance system. It's not like because you have a day or two it gets 70 degrees, they go out and fly around and mate and lay eggs or anything. It takes multiple days of those sorts of conditions for them to be able to do it. And probably the biggest exception would be fire ants. Fire ants, if you get a rain and it's warm, that mound will respond almost instantly, and they'll get active again. They'll go out and they'll look for food and things. But they don't go too crazy during the winter, simply because whether it's an interaction with day length, that the day length is too short for them to get real active. We don't fully understand that. And then some insects just simply won't respond. They go into hibernation very quickly, and they're going to wait it out till things warm up for sure. And we get consecutive days that stay warm.
All right. Well, I'm going to ask my last dumb question, and then I'm going to turn it over to some of the experts who have some real challenges on their courses here to ask some questions. So I'll kind of facilitate the order as we go. But when you talked about the fire ants, so behind my house is Brushy Creek over here in a little area, if you will, the upstate. And it runs, I mean, it's a pretty big watershed, if you will, that separates some school lines. But when we get some rain events, like we typically will get Brian Steeler's water coming from Highlands through my backyard. Okay. And I tell the kids, you can't go back there, because aside from the snakes and the logs, there's going to be mounds of fire ants that are going to be floating through. Is there any truth to that?
That has certainly been proven after hurricanes, that when we have flooding, you'll see these huge clumps of fire ants floating in the water. It's almost like their own life. Yeah. So yeah, they can, during periods of heavy rainfall and flooding, you will see just right alongside the snakes and everything else, you'll see these huge mounds of fire ants that will be clinging together, forming kind of a raft floating around.
So we ended up with a couple hay bales back there. And they said, Dad, when did you bring the hay back here? Because they thought we were going to shoot our bow. And I was like, I didn't take it back there. So I was trying to explain to them the flow, like with the, if you will, fire ants as well. So, all right. Well, Matthew was on first, so I'm going to turn it over to Matthew. Matthew, what is your bug question for the Charlotte area? And you're not allowed to talk about mole crickets, stink bugs, or fire ants, because we've already covered that. And you'll have to go back and listen when we put this out.
Matt, you can ask any question you want.
Damn it, I tried.
Well, I was going to say,
I probably won't be able to answer it.
I mean, fire ants is the only major insect issue I deal with on my golf course, Tim. And I just joined, so I missed the fire ant conversation. But I'm not going to put Dr. Brandenburg on the spot and make him repeat all that. So
he said use a propane blowtorch and keep it away from the clubhouse.
I want a flame. Well, how about a flamethrower? Can I use a flamethrower?
Yes.
Do you recommend putting gasoline on the mound first?
No, I wouldn't do that.
I will ask you this. I had an old timer. I had a member here,
Someone like me.
I had a member here, an old timer, that told me to take a shovel and scoop up a fire ant mound and dump it on top of a separate fire ant mound, and that the two colonies would battle each other. True or myth?
If you do that, the two colonies will battle each other. As to whether or not it will control either mound, that is still open for debate. But yes, if you dump them on each other, they will go after each other, and you can make a really neat YouTube video. But as far as them actually controlling each other, there's no substance to that one. But
Awesome.
it will provide some entertainment on a Saturday afternoon.
Well, I'm gonna give that a try.
Yeah, I would do that.
Yeah. Okay.
Take your PPE. Matthew's done. All right, Mr.
Yeah.
Bagwell, I think you were up next. What do you got from the Low Country? What's your question down there on an island where ants can't travel?
Yeah. Mine would be about grubs, and mainly in home lawns, because I have all of my members claiming that I run the grubs from the golf course into their yards, which then that's why the moles come into their yards. So what do you do with those, and is there any truth to that, with that moles are chasing the grubs, and what do you do to get rid of them?
When you say what do you do with those, are you referring to the members or the grubs and the moles?
Both.
Yeah.
Both,
all of the above.
members first.
I'll stop by this.
Here's there's no truth to you relocating the grubs. I mean, grubs are not mobile. Grubs are mobile vertically, but not mobile horizontally, really, to any degree. So it's not like you have an infestation you treat and they slowly migrate into their lawns. That doesn't happen. It's beetles that fly around, Japanese beetles during the day, mass chafers at night. They lay their eggs oftentimes where there's good soil moisture, but oftentimes where there's a lot of organic matter. So if they haven't dethatched their lawns and things like that, that lawn is going to be more attractive than your fairway every time.
Yep.
So that's important to know. So you're not driving them or forcing them. They're just creating an attractive environment for the adults to lay their eggs there. The question in low country, I know that moles are just ridiculously abundant. They feed on a lot of creatures. When I first started in this business, everybody said, well, you've got moles, you must have white grubs. The reality is, if you've got any living creature in the soil, you can have moles. Really, and they love earthworms, and in your organic soils down there's lots of earthworms, and it's just a feast for moles. And as a result, you've got a lot of them, and you could not have a single grub out there, and you could have an incredibly healthy mole population. So, and then you get into what's politically correct. What do you do with the worms and all that sort of stuff? And the reality of it is, with the products that we use today on golf courses, there's so much more. They're so environmentally friendly that we have zero negative impact on earthworm populations. And earthworms in most highly treated turf are more abundant than they were 20, 25 years ago because of the switch in products. So we have more earthworms, you get more moles. Moles are a pain. They're tough. Some of the repellents do seem to work, but all you end up doing is trying to herd them into natural areas and things like that. And you have to reapply, and this stuff is like $64 a gallon. You got to put it out every 2 weeks. So it's really a challenge. The sonic repellers don't work at all on moles. So you didn't cause it, and the only reason they're there is because you do things in an environmentally friendly way.
Hey, so does the juicy fruit work?
No. And see, that's why too, there's moles and there's voles, and voles are the little furry ones that are smaller that feed on the roots of shrubs and things like that. Things like poison peanuts, which you can find them at truck stops and everything else. Voles will actually eat those. Moles won't typically eat them because moles eat living animals, creatures. They don't eat plant material. So that won't work. There's the product called the taliprid bait, TALIPRID, which is shaped like a worm. It almost looks like one of those little gummy bear things. Those will work reasonably well, but you need to wear gloves when you handle them, because if you get your scent on them, they won't be as attractive. And I know some people have had some really good success, and I played with a box of them one time, and they seem to work okay. But there's no good answer for moles.
You pet feed them?
They could, if you don't feed them. They'll look for something to eat. If you got a big dog, don't feed it, and it'll kill some moles probably.
All right, so here's we go. As we run around and you asked your question, put your microphone on mute so we don't get a bunch of back noise. Brian, you're going to go next because you're the one crunching, making the most noise. So I'm going to let you ask your question to Dr. Brandenburg, and then you can put yourself on mute. Steeler, that is.
My question is about Carpenter bees. I need to get rid of Carpenter Bees, Doc. My house.
The mason jar traps work.
Mason jars, yeah, mason jar traps don't work in my opinion, but I need to get rid of these things. My house is disappearing at a remarkable rate.
Okay, that's there's actually a pretty long answer to that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post on Turf Files, and I'm also going to post it on my Facebook page, a link that has an article with all the information on Carpenter Bees.
Oh,
It's not an easy answer, but there are some answers to it. And I don't want to take up the next 15 minutes. So let me just do that, Brian, if that's okay. I'll post information on it, and I'll also just email it directly to you.
Yes.
All right.
awesome.
Let me ask one question about that though. If you see a hole where the Carpenter Bees going in, is there multiple, like, is there a whole colony in there? Like,
No, they're a solitary bee. So they're building a nest on their own.
Okay.
So like if you put a stick in there, 100 of them aren't going to fly out and nail you.
Yeah. Okay.
One of them might. But if you really want to seem like you're really cool, the males have a yellow dot on their forehead right above their eyes.
Yeah.
They don't have a stinger. So like if you see them flying around your roses or flowers, and you make sure you see that yellow dot, you can actually reach out and catch it in your hand, and it'll buzz like crazy, and you can act like you're getting stung and say, then throw it down and say, that was nothing. People will really be impressed.
Yeah.
Well, they might be impressed. They might wonder who it is they work for. But if you make sure you see that yellow dot right on their forehead, and that is a male, and they have no stinger. And you can impress your friends and neighbors, especially at a barbecue or something.
Yeah.
Keep your EpiPen with you, Brian.
Huh?
Keep your EpiPen with you, Brian, when you pull that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So by the time I see that yellow dot, that thing's in the neighbor's yard because I whacked it with my electrocution tennis racket.
There you go.
All right, Brian, you're on mute. Up next, we're going to have, I think Alex was the next one to join in. Mr. Tolbert, what you got going down there with your, are your greens all right now with all this rain?
Yeah, they're not too bad.
Nice.
My question's on the same lines as Billy's. I get members complaining to me all the time, but they're complaining that I move the mole crickets to their yard instead of keeping them on the golf course. So I tell them it's not me. I kind of give them the same answer you gave for that. They just like their yard a whole lot better than they like the golf course. So any truth to me moving mole crickets to their yard than the golf course?
Yeah, there is some truth to that one, but we don't need to tell a lot of people.
Yeah.
Can you send them a Facebook link so we don't put that online anywhere for a homeowner to watch this?
well, here's the thing. They just have to suck it up and realize that they have a nice lawn. They have to manage their pest problems too. And the reality of it is, mole crickets are much more mobile. They have a greater ability to detect pesticides that we put out, and they will kind of crawl out from under the tablecloth of insecticide to some degree, and they'll move into areas where there are no insecticides. So there is some truth to that. Now, you're not moving mole crickets from the center or fairway all the way through the rough to their lawn, just the ones right along the edge that you might treat. A few of them might escape and move into their lawn. So there is a little bit of truth to that. But there's, the only option is don't treat, and you're not going to find that one acceptable. So,
No.
They just need to understand now what they could do is they could put a barrier up on their lawn. They could treat an area 10 feet wide near the rough or whatever to help keep them from doing that. But the reality of it is they probably got them laying eggs in their yard, and it's more just their own problem than you moving them in.
Sure. Okay.
All right. Next up is going to be Chuck Connolly. Now, this one we got to pay close attention to. He's only 4.3 miles as a tractor drives to the house. So these are important questions, Doc. Pay attention.
All right.
They're really not that important with the amount of rainfall that we've already. And historically, we have seen an uptick in fall armyworms when the hurricanes come through the Gulf, and kind of that seems to fire off. But with the amount of rain that we had up to this point, what pest is the problem down here in the upstate of South Carolina? That, with the amount of rainfall that we've had, what's probably going to be a big heavy one? Is it going to be armyworms, or are we looking at and fire ants and some surface stuff.
Yeah. The fall armyworms are probably our most unpredictable pest, and you're exactly right that when we get heavy rainfall and after hurricanes, we seem to have the most problem with them. You know, even this past winter, as mild as it was, they didn't overwinter in the Carolinas at all. So it's still going to be that same scenario where they move in, and where they end up, nobody knows. When we get tropical storms, which we've already had two tropical storms off the coast now, that could have brought them up early. Time will tell. So their movement into the state is very much regulated by weather movements, and tropical storms certainly move them in more quickly, and hurricanes certainly seem to contribute to that. The other thing is we just seem to see more of them than we used to. When I first started this business, a fall armyworm outbreak was a rare phenomenon, but they overwinter in Florida, and it seems that there's I guess subspecies or whatever, and the ones that prefer Bermuda grass, hybrid Bermuda grass, seem to be more abundant than the ones that prefer like corn, for example. So we get flights of them coming in here, we have more of the strain that likes to feed on Bermuda grass. And so they are more problematic. The thing that I don't understand is, you know, a lot of you've used acelepryn as a border or barrier around your fairways and tees and greens, kind of a chemical fence. Last year, I had a lot of reports and actually went to a number of locations where they got through that fence, or so it appears they got on the inside of that fence. And I don't fully understand it, because where the acelepryn was sprayed, the grass was still nice and green and lush, that no feeding actually took place in there. So I don't know if heavy rains actually floated them across the area or what, but I think acelepryn is still a very good compound to use. And time will tell. Well, it'll be interesting to see if these first two tropical storms we've already had off the coast have already blown some fall armyworm malls into the Carolinas. Because finding them in June is a really, really early time of year to start finding fall armyworms. So we'll know here in the next few weeks.
The way this season's panning out, might as well get fall armyworms in the middle of June. This is
got Portuguese man-o-war at the beach now too, to go with everything else this year. Did y'all see that?
I did see that.
All right, thanks, Chuck. Next up, I think we had Pete Gurdon. We're trying to wrap this up in the next 5 minutes. Go ahead, Pete. What's your question?
My question is how good of a product is acelepryn early in the year to get adults annual bluegrass weevils?
It's not the preferred product. I would go, you know, that's a multi-approach, and one of the issues we've got is that pyrethroid insecticides like Talstar, Scimitar, the generics are really good until you develop resistance, and resistance happens very, very quickly. Ference is a compound that Syngenta has, seems to be better than the acelepryn. Again, it's annual bluegrass weevils are perhaps the most challenging pest we have, because it requires a multi-application approach where you go after overwintering adults as they move back onto the golf course. You go after, you know, the larvae, you go after adult stage. And by not doing all those steps, your control is going to be marginal. And we also know that in Western Carolinas, the biology and ecology just doesn't match up with all the good work that's been done in Massachusetts and New York and Pennsylvania and all that. There's just some weird differences that it doesn't match up. The weevil track system, for example, that Syngenta has, doesn't match up very well with the populations we see in the Carolinas.
All right, thanks, Doc. Next, I think we've got Don Garrett. And since Alan's not on the call, we don't have to worry about him asking about orange bugs in particular. What do you got over there in Clemson?
I got some Bermuda grass mites.
Aha.
Thought you had zoysia.
I got zoysia greens. But I got JC on the hunt. He's coming up and doing some trials, but we've got a good many of them here and there.
Yeah. I just posted something on that on Twitter, and it's another one of those pests that we're seeing more and more and more common. It's interesting how when I first came to this job 35 years ago, and I was looking at my predecessor's file cabinet, he had all these publications on things like side webworm and all that. And, you know, I've seen a few handfuls of sod webworm problems over the last 30 some years, and no one ever even thought about things like Bermuda grass mites, zoysia grass mites, all sorts of mites. And now it's becoming more and more common, and they are difficult to control. You know, we're looking at a lot of different options, and I know JC's probably done more work than anybody, but we are seeing them more and more often in Bermuda grass, another species, in zoysia grass than what we used to see. And
well, I had some back in the 80s at Kiowa, and we sprayed Kelthane.
Yes.
And it's apparently gone.
That product is gone. And we used to have an old pyrethroid that was, the trade name was Maverick, that actually worked fairly well, and that's gone. You know, the one thing we know that works on them is abamectin, a biological product, and you know, it's available in the ag market. There's some newer products that are out for the turf market, and we've had some pretty good success with that. And JC hopefully can find out some more information on it, because he's really the one that's doing most of the work on that right now.
Yeah, he said he's got 2 or 3 experimental ones that he's looking at. So some miticides that are labeled in the ornamental side that he's going to try, and
okay,
we'll see.
All right.
All right.
Good
Thanks,
luck on it.
guys. All right, Mr. Huntoon, what's shaking down at the beach? What are your big problems down there other than lack of tourism for the last couple months?
Most of my questions have already been answered. You know, mole crickets, Dr. Brandenburg talked about that, and armyworms. I have noticed a lot of eggs on flags and 150 poles. Are those fall armyworms, or are those another, like a different type of caterpillar?
I would say they probably are not. It's just too early this early, even regardless of what the winter was like and everything else. Because again, even though we had a mild winter, that insect is very tropical and simply cannot. I mean, it doesn't even overwinter like in Savannah, Georgia. So I would guess it's still a little on the early side. But you know what? We all get surprises every year, so it could be.
So they could be like black cutworm eggs or something along those lines?
Black cutworms are going to lay their eggs on the turf most of the time, but there are some other species that could lay their eggs on there. But you know, I get surprises every year, but I doubt it that they're this early.
I'm going with grasshoppers, Jim.
Okay.
All right. Well, Dr. Brandenburg, we appreciate you. Oh, wait. Eric, Eric didn't have anything. He said, Brian, you moved. My screen rearranged. I forgot you got your local guy over there at NC State there, Mr. Brandenburg. Brian, what you got for him?
My question, I got 2 questions. First question, how many Zoom meetings have you done since March 15th?
This is my second one.
kind of like being on candid camera doing these things, isn't it?
You know.